Hey y'all, my name's Tyson, and today we're going to compare the native solid tools to several of the extensions for solid tools that are available to you. Solid tools are also referred to in modeling terms as Boolean tools. And we have some native options, and then we're going to look at three different extensions: Christina Inaroth's solid tools, MindSight Studio's Bool tools, and Fluid Interactive's Bool Pro. And we're going to try to give each a fair just assessment. And I'm not trying to dish or put down any of these options, but some of them have advantages in different ways. So I just want to give that comparison to you so you have more information on which of these might work for your circumstances. That's what we're going to try and do. Lots to cover. It should be fun. Let's jump into it. We are not going to be able to go over each of the solid tool icons and tools and do a thorough examination of what they do. There are videos out there that will tell you what each of these do. Instead, what we're going to try and do is cover just a few categories of the differences between these. Now, solid tools will allow you to create something like this. If we look at this, it is a solid group, doesn't have any geometry internally, but you can imagine that this would be very difficult to create in any other way. But solid tools allows us to take, if we move this and this 10 feet over, and then I'm going to take those objects, group them, go inside that group, because this group is now nested. It is not solid. But I'm going to go inside, ungroup these, and that means this is a solid group. So with the native solid tools, I could say, here's my cutting object, and here's the object I want to be preserved, and create something like that. And then we could take another object, and even though these are separate objects, but if we wanted to merge these into one, we could select these and use one of these options, union or outer shell, and merge that into one piece, one object. That is what solid tools allows us to do, and these other tools will allow us to do the same thing. However, what we want to look at is, here's our categories. Number one, can you operate with non-solid, or can you only operate with solid objects? Number two, will you preserve components? Number three, this is actually two. I'm going to say color and speed. They're not related, but I'm just putting them together in what we'll talk about. Four is what we'll call the tiny test. Some of you will be aware that if you're working on very small geometry, these operations don't always work that well. And then five, we'll call order of operations, how some of these tools work. Solid objects. So here's, let's move this over here to the side. The native solid tools. And one of the nice things about the native solid tools is that they're just built in, meaning that they're also in the iPad version and the web version, at least the paid web version, and the educational version. This is a solid group. This sphere is a solid group. We can, for example, merge these or intersect them. If we were to go in and remove this top circle, let's say, this is no longer a solid group, and we try to use these, it's going to say no. Or if we try to select them, it won't even let us select it. If we go down the row, Inaroth's tools also won't work with non-solids. So if I try to do this with Christina's tool, it's not going to work. This will, however, if we use MindSight Studio's Bool tools, it's going to give us a warning, but it is going to at least say, we'll try. If we look at this, it did succeed and it actually closed the top of that circle for us. That could vary depending on what you're trying to do. It may or may not work, but Bool Tools is the only option that will at least try to create an object out of these solid tools. And another part of that that's kind of interesting. So if we move this back, oh no, I didn't move it exactly, is that Christina's and our native tools, neither of these will work with nested. So if I have these various components or groups and I just select these all and group them, well, it's not solid, right? I've created a nested set of groups. Native tools, Christina's tools, will not work with that. The Bool tools, however, will. So I could come in here, for example, and say I want to preserve this sphere and cut this nested group out from it. It's going to take a moment, but it should work for us. So that's the first category that I'm just calling solid objects, and whether or not your objects, your groups and components need to be fully solid. MindSight Studio's version is the only one that will attempt to do either nested or non-solids and still try to resolve them. So that's category 1. Oh, you know what? I should have mentioned this final tool, Bool Pro. This operates completely differently than the others of these. So we're just going to talk about this one at the end, and we're just going to compare these 3 options as we go forward here, but we'll talk about this one at the end. All right, next category, components. Does the tool preserve your options as components? Short answer is the native tools do not, but Christina's tool and MindSight Studio's Bool tools do. That's the short answer. Here's the quick example. Let's just grab this and this and move it over here. This sphere is a solid group. Let's make it a component. And if we ran the native tools and said, okay, we're going to copy this sphere over here, and then we're going to cut this away from it. This was reduced to a group. It did not preserve the component behavior. However, while this is still a component, we could say with the Christina's solid tools, and the bit of weighting that we're doing here, we'll come to that in the next one. But you can see it preserved that component, that sphere as a component, and it operated the same over here. And the same will happen if we used Bool tools. So components, native tools do not preserve your components, but Christina's tool and Bool tools do. All right, components. Let's go to, how about color and speed? Well, let me just say on the speed front, this is going to be a little bit relative to obviously the factors of your computer and what you're trying to do. In my experience, in my testing, the native tools are the fastest option. If you set them up correctly, they work almost instantly in most situations. MindSight Studio's Bool tools, though, are pretty fast. They might take a few moments, but they work very quickly. Christina Inroth's tool, it takes a while with most operations, and with complex operations, it can take 30 seconds up to a minute. I do want to note, Christina's tool is free, and as we saw, it preserves components. So if nothing else, it's a great addition to the native tools just to have because it's free. Bool Tools is a paid extension, and Bool Pro is a paid extension. So even though Christina's tool, in my experience, does operate the slowest, it is still nice to have as an option. All right, how about color? Well, this one is fairly straightforward to see. If we use the native tools, it's going to try and sort of preserve the colors of the different objects that you're interacting with. If we did this with Christina's, let's say we did a different operation, but it should combine the colors. So Interauth Solid Tools tends to preserve one of the colors overall. And then finally, Mindsight Studios is going to also try and preserve different colors of the different objects. So if we were to, let's say, you can see it's preserving the color. So that may not be that important. You can obviously color things afterwards. I don't think it's that crucial, but just keep in mind that the native tools and Bool tools will tend to try to preserve the different materials of different objects, and the Christina Solid Tools tends to combine them. Okay, the tiny test. This one, if you're not familiar with it, then let's just come on out and say it. SketchUp does not work that great with very small geometry. This is less than half an inch in total. And if I were to come in here and let me just set this up so it'll work with any of these. So I'm going to group this, come in, and then ungroup these. So it's a solid group. Native tools. Let's try that first. So I'm going to subtract this from this. And look at how some of these are rendering. It did capture the geometry, but not entirely. There are some problems. And if we were to continue this and merge these, in some cases, we'll lose geometry altogether. I'm not going to use Christina's version on this. In my experience, Christina's version does not like small geometry, even more so than the native tools. So native tools, this is why you use the Dave method, which is why you make something much larger and then you scale it back down. Or the Dave method is to make something a component and then make a component much larger, but our native tools don't preserve components. So you just have to know your scaling ratios. I'm going to undo and show that if we look at the Bool tools, it does tend to just work better with small geometry. So you can see that just the results are cleaner altogether. Again, you can use the old time-tested method of scaling something up and then scaling it back down if you're using the native tools. That's totally fine. But just another point in the Bool tools category, that tool does seem to work best with small geometry. All right, that's the tiny test. And finally, okay, hopefully you're still here with us. The order of operations, you will have noticed this perhaps as we've been working along. But here's what I mean. This is particularly for the subtract commands, or in Bool Tools, it's called difference, but it's the same thing. And it's the order in which you pick the operation. For the native tools, you're going to pick the cutting object first, and then the object you want to leave second. And then you still have that option. So there are cases where this might work, but if I wanted to cut this away as well, if I cut this, well, it actually cuts that sphere out from this. So keep that in mind, that with the native tools, you're picking the cutting object first, and then the object second, which means I need to reactivate this tool. And if I wanted to do something like this, I will simply say without operating that, well, we should be able to do one of these. Interoth's version picks the object to keep first and the object to cut away second. So that is nice. And in that case, that is nice in something like this, because I can click on here, and then I should be able to click here and continue to operate, cut pieces away. In this case, obviously what we saw is that you would have multiple pieces of geometry as one object, but you can see how that works. I'm going to, just to show, and finally the Bool tools. Also, you want to click on the object you're keeping first, and then the cutting object second. But then this tool is nice because it resets back to the cutting object. So I can click here, here, and then I can keep going. So as long as I click back on the object I want to preserve, I can start cutting away other objects as well. So that is the order of operations. The native tool wants you to pick the cutting object first and the resulting object second, but both of our other tools work the other way. Frankly, I'm just going to jump into my opinion corner here. I wish our native tools actually worked that way, and that we would preserve the cutting object and you could select multiple others. I think there was some logic why we chose the other order, but I'm not fully aware of what it is. And so just be aware of that. That's just another one of those things to keep in mind. That is the main comparison. And like I say, Christina Interoth's solid tools are free. So simply because they preserve components, even with some of the other limitations on them, it's a good option to have with the native tools. Bool Tools is a paid extension, but if this type of operation and Boolean or solid tools modeling is something you do frequently, this gives you a lot of reliability and preserves components essentially. So it might be something that is worth a look at. I'm pretty sure that they've got a trial version of it, and you can see how it works for you. Okay, that was fun. We're going to step away from this type of what we'll call destructive modeling, where you run an operation and it is final and then you keep going, and look at Bool Pro, which is more of a little bit parametric. So let's just look at what it does just for comparison. And then again, you can decide sort of how well it could work for you. In this case, what we're going to do is try to recreate this object. So I'm just going to erase this and move some of my pieces, let's say 10 feet out of the way. This one, when I open this up, it will have a default tree. I'm going to remove this tree and start a new one. So we're going to have a tree, is our starting place. And if I select that tree, I want to start a new operation. And if I double click on this, I get a couple of the Boolean options, mostly union or difference. In this case, I want difference. Right? I want to cut things away as opposed to union, which will combine them. And then once I have that operation going, I'm going to add an operand. In fact, I'm going to add several. And what is key here is that the first, so I'm going to double click, then click into my scene and click on the sphere. And it's just going to say it's operand 23. And that's probably because I was running this earlier. So it's just operation 23. If I move, let's say I'll just move this one forward 10 feet. And I'm going to say here, double click to pick from scene, reactivate my model, and then I'm going to click here. Now, what I want to click on here is auto update, and that should show us in real time what is happening. And the amazing thing about this extension is it is going to update as we make changes. So with that sphere as our top one, I'm going to add a few more of these. So I'll move this one. Actually, let's do this one first. I'll move this one forward 10 feet, and I'll pick that as my next operand. Okay. And again, I could move that around. I want to combine a few more, so I'm going to add, let me select the difference and add 2 more here. I found when I was using this, I'm just going to move these both into place. There's not a lot of documentation on this particular extension. So as very interesting as it is, it's a little finicky to figure out how to use, but I'm going to double click, then click here, and it's cut that top away now, and then I'll add this final one, double click, click into my scene and pick this object, and it should, and there it is. So again, this is remarkable because it allows us to come in, for example, and say, you know what, I want this to be smaller, and we're going to see in a moment, it updates here. So this type of real-time feedback is fascinating and very interesting. Here's a couple of the caveats that I found. If you use this tool, there may be a way, I think you're supposed to be able to put different operations under the same tree. I had trouble with that. So if I wanted to take this, I could take this group, move a copy of it. Well, no, sorry, let me step back. I could start a new tree that I wanted to union this with something else, and then start to add other objects, and it would start another. So you could sort of get this cascading effect of changes happening. Again, I'm not entirely sure that's the correct way to use it, but I found the documentation pretty sparse. Also, let's look at the geometry that it's created for us. What a mess. However, I say that and then I immediately want to caveat, I could simply take this, take a copy, and then I'm going to run the cleanup extension on it and clean it back up into the geometry we'd expect if we had created this with just the normal solid operation. So when you see this mess of geometry in here, don't totally think that you're stuck with that. Use the cleanup extension, and the solid tools extension is also useful for our solids anyway. But that is a very brief look. Again, I'm sure there's more to this. This extension to me feels like kind of the bleeding edge of this option. It is finicky to use. I have had some trouble getting the results I wanted, but like I say, this real time um, feedback. And again, we could turn off the auto update and then just update it manually. But that is pretty remarkable. That I think that's quite an incredible tool. Um, so keep it as an option. Again, it's a paid option. It may or may not do you know, what you want, but it's pretty cool. So I wanted to at least acknowledge that this was um, one of the one of our options out there. Oh, okay. This was kind of a whirlwind of extensions and things to look at, probably longer than our typical skill builder. But I did find that this, like when I was going through this, I did find it just really fascinating to look at, the comparisons available for this type of solids or Boolean modeling. So I hope it was helpful that you could now get an idea of which of these options, again, might work best for you. I'm not trying to say any are good or bad. They're all just great to have as options. I do think some of them are more powerful, but again, Christina's the native tools are embedded. Christina's tool is free. Mindsight Studios has their paid option, and then Bool Pro from um, my mind's blanking. Fluid Interactive. The too many things going through my head is also paid. Try them out. See what works for you. Let us know in the comments if you have a preference or which ones work best in certain situations. I'd be very curious to see if you, those of you out here who have tried these, what you think. Other than that, let us know what you'd also like to see in future skill builders or other extension comparisons. We'd love to try and bring that forth. And like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, y'all.